Hello everyone. Today we are going to read chapter 7 Women, Caste and Reform. We are going to complete this chapter in two parts. Have you ever thought of how children lived about 200 years ago? Nowadays, most girls from middle class families go to school and often study with boys. On growing up, many of them go to colleges and universities and take up jobs after that. They have to be adults before they are legally married, and according to law, they can marry anyone they like from any caste and community, and widows can remarry too. All women, like all men, can vote and stand for elections. Of course, these rights are not actually enjoyed by all. Poor people have little or no access to education, and in many families, women cannot choose their husbands. 200 years ago, things were very different. Most children were married off at an early age. Both Hindu and Muslim men could marry more than one wife. In some parts of the country, widows were praised if they chose death by burning themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands. Women who died in this manner, whether willingly or otherwise, were called sati, meaning virtuous women. Women's rights to property were also restricted. Besides, most women had virtually no access to education. In many parts of the country, people believed that if a woman was educated, she would become a widow. Differences between men and women were not the only ones in society. In most regions, people were divided along lines of caste. Brahmins and Kshatriyas considered themselves as upper caste. Others, such as traders and money lenders, often referred to as Vaishyas, were placed after them. Then came peasants and artisans such as weavers and potters, referred to as Shudras. At the lowest rung were those people who labored to keep cities and villages clean or worked at jobs that upper caste considered polluting, that is, it could lead to the loss of caste status. The upper caste also treated many of these groups at the bottom as untouchable. They were not allowed to enter temples, draw water from the wells used by the upper caste, or bath in ponds where upper caste bathed. They were seen as inferior human beings. Over the 19th and 20th centuries, many of these norms and perceptions slowly changed. Let us see how this happened. Working towards change. From the early 19th century, we find debates and discussions about social customs and practices taking on a new character. One important reason for this was the development of new forms of communication. For the first time, books, newspapers, magazines, leaflets, and pamphlets were printed. These were far cheaper and far more accessible than the manuscripts that you have read about in class 7. Therefore, ordinary people could read these, and many of them could also write and express their ideas in their own language. All kinds of issues, social, political, economic, and religious, could now be debated and discussed by men and sometimes by women as well in the new cities. The discussions could reach out to a wider public and could become linked to movements for social change. These debates were often initiated by Indian reformers and reform groups. One such reformer was Raja Ram Mohan Roy, 1772 to 1833. He founded a reform association known as the Brahma Sabha, later known as the Brahma Samaj, in Calcutta. People such as Ram Mohan Roy are described as reformers because they felt that changes were necessary in society and unjust practices needed to be done away with. They thought that the best way to ensure such changes was by persuading people to give up old practices and adopt a new way of life. Ram Mohan Roy was keen to spread the knowledge of Western education in the country and bring about greater freedom and equality for women. He wrote about the way women were forced to bear the burden of domestic work, confined to the home and the kitchen, and not allowed to move out and become educated. Changing the lives of widows. Ram Mohan Roy was particularly moved by the problems widows faced in their lives. He began a campaign against the practice of sati. Ram Mohan Roy was well versed in Sanskrit, Persian, and several other Indian and European languages. He tried to show through his writings that the practice of widow burning had no sanction in ancient texts. By the early 19th century, as you have read in chapter 7, many British officials had also begun to criticize Indian traditions and customs. They were therefore more than willing to listen to Ram Mohan, who was reputed to be a learned man. In 1829, sati was banned. The strategy adopted by Ram Mohan was used by later reformers as well. Whenever they wished to change a practice that seemed harmful, they tried to find a verse or sentence in the ancient sacred text that supported their point of view. They then suggested that the practice as it existed at present was against early tradition. In this hook swinging festival, in this popular festival, devotees underwent a peculiar form of suffering as part of ritual worship. With hooks pierced through their skin, they swung themselves on the wheel. In the early 19th century, when European officials began criticizing Indian customs and rituals as barbaric, this was one of the rituals that came under attack. We first tie them down to the pile. Ram Mohan Roy published many pamphlets to spread his ideas. Some of these were written as a dialogue between the advocate and critic of a traditional practice. Here is one such dialogue on sati. Advocate of sati. Women are by nature of inferior understanding, without resolution, unworthy of trust. Many of them, on the death of their husband, become desirous of accompanying them, but to remove every chance of their trying to escape from the blazing fire, in burning them, we first tie them down to the pile. Opponent of sati. When did you ever afford them a fair opportunity of exhibiting their natural capacity? How then can you accuse them of want of understanding? If after instruction in knowledge and wisdom a person cannot comprehend or retain what has been taught him, we may consider him as deficient. But if you do not educate women, how can you see them as inferior? For instance, one of the most famous reformers, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, used the ancient text to suggest that widows could remarry. His suggestion was adopted by British officials and a law was passed in 1856 permitting widow remarriage. Those who were against the remarriage of widows opposed Vidyasagar and even boycotted him. By the second half of the 19th century, the movement in favor of widow marriage spread to other parts of the country. In the Telugu speaking areas of the Madras Presidency, Veerasalingam Pantulu formed an association for widow remarriage. Around the same time, young intellectuals and reformers in Bombay pledged themselves to working for the same cause. In the north, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who founded the Reform Association called Arya Samaj, also supported widow remarriage. Yet the number of widows who actually remarried remained low. Those who married were not easily accepted in society, and conservative groups continued to oppose the new law. Girls began going to school. Many of the reformers felt that education for girls was necessary in order to improve the condition of women. Vidyasagar in Calcutta and many other reformers in Bombay set up schools for girls. When the first schools were opened in the mid 19th century, many people were afraid of them. They feared that schools would take girls away from home, prevent them from doing their domestic duties. Moreover, girls had to travel through public places in order to reach school. Many people felt that this would have a corrupting influence on them. They felt that girls should stay away from public spaces. Therefore, throughout the 19th century, most educated women were taught at home by liberal fathers or husbands. Sometimes women taught themselves. Do you remember what you read about Rajasundari Devi in your book Social and Political Life last year? She was one of those who secretly learned to read and write in the flickering light of candles at night. In the latter part of the century, schools for girls were established by the Arya Samaj in Punjab and Jyotirao Phule in Maharashtra. In aristocratic Muslim households in North India, women learned to read the Quran in Arabic. They were taught by women who came home to teach. Some reformers such as Mumtaz Ali reinterpreted verses from the Quran to argue for women's education. The first Urdu novels began to be written from the late 19th century. Amongst other things, these were meant to encourage women to read about religion and domestic management in a language they could understand. Women write about women. From the early 20th century, Muslim women like the Begums of Bhopal played a notable role in promoting education among women. They founded a primary school for girls at Aligarh. Another remarkable woman, Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, started schools for Muslim girls in Patna and Calcutta. She was a fearless critic of conservative ideas, arguing that religious leaders of every faith accorded an inferior place to women. By the 1880s, Indian women began to enter universities. Some of them trained to be doctors, some became teachers. Many women began to write and publish their critical views on the place of women in society. Tarabai Shinde, a woman educated at home at Pune, published a book, Istri Purush Tulna, a comparison between women and men, criticizing the social differences between men and women. Pandita Ramabai, a great scholar of Sanskrit, felt that Hinduism was oppressive towards women and wrote a book about the miserable lives of upper caste Hindu women. She founded a widow's home at Pune to provide shelter to widows who had been treated badly by their husbands' relatives. Here, women were trained so that they could support themselves economically. Needless to say, all this more than alarmed the Orthodox. For instance, many Hindu nationalists felt that Hindu women were adopting Western ways and that this would corrupt Hindu culture and erode family values. Orthodox Muslims were also worried about the impact of these changes. As you can see, by the end of the 19th century, women themselves were actively working for reform. They wrote books, edited magazines, founded schools and training centers, and set up women's associations. From the early 20th century, they found political pressure groups to push through laws for female suffrage, the right to vote, and better health care and education for women. Some of them joined various kinds of nationalist and socialist movements from the 1920s. In the 20th century, leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose lent their support to demand for greater equality and freedom for women. Nationalist leaders promised that there would be full suffrage for all men and women after independence. However, till then they asked women to concentrate on the anti-British struggles. Once a woman's husband has died. In her book Stri Purush Tulna, Tarabai Shinde wrote, "Isn't a woman's life as dear to her as yours is to you? It's as if women are meant to be made of something different from men altogether, made from dust from earth or rock or rusted iron, whereas you and your lives are made from the purest gold." You are asking me what I mean. I mean, once a woman's husband has died, what's in store for her? The barber comes to shave all the curls and hair off her head just to cool your eyes. She is shut out from going to weddings, receptions, and other auspicious occasions that married women go to. And why all these restrictions? Because her husband has died? She is unlucky. Ill fate is written on her forehead. Her face is not to be seen. It's a bad omen. ताराबाई शिंदे, स्त्री पुरुष तुलना. Law against child marriage. With the growth of women's organizations and writings on these issues, the momentum for reform gained strength. People challenged another established custom, that of child marriage. There were a number of Indian legislators in the Central Legislative Assembly who fought to make a law preventing child marriage. In 1929, the Child Marriage Restraint Act was passed without the kind of bitter debates and struggles that earlier laws had seen. According to the Act, no man below the age of 18 and woman below the age of 16 could marry. Subsequently, these limits were raised to 21 for men and 18 for women. This is the picture of child bride at the beginning of the 20th century. Did you know that even today over 20% of girls in India are married below the age of 18? So this was the reading of our 7th chapter, Women, Caste and Reforms. If you have any doubt or query you can ask me in the comment section below, and you can find the link to the other part and the other chapters in the description box below. Thank you everyone.